everybody. Welcome to the Hallmarkies podcast and happy President's Day. We have a special episode for you today. In honor of the day, we are going to be talking about The American President, the 1995 film about president dating. So it's going to be fun. And I have a special guest with me today. I'm film critic Rachel Wagner, and Patrick Beatty is back on the podcast. Thanks so much.
Hey, you thought you got rid of me. And just so you know, we did have video, and there were attempts to be presidential in said videos, but that is not going to happen, so
Yeah.
we shouldn't address it.
But how are you doing?
I'm doing good. I'm excited to talk about this movie. I just saw it yesterday, and yeah, when you gave me the premise before we started the pod, I initially didn't understand, but I get it now.
Is this your first time ever watching it?
Yeah, first time seeing it. And honestly, the genre itself, like this little subgenre of like being with the president. I mean, we've got all the romance with like you're going out with this prince that's from another country or this princess from a different nation, and like it's a commoner that's doing it or something.
Mhm.
But this is a very different one. This feels like just straight up weird at this time. Like if you were to look at this time and someone tried to make this movie, ooh.
Yeah, we're definitely going to talk about that and talk about some other presidential movies that we like. We actually, in the past, we did an episode on President's Day that was about movies about the president's daughter.
Oh.
Yeah. So we'll put a link down if you want to listen to that. It was from 2018, so it's a while back. But we talked about Chasing Liberty, My Date with the President's Daughter, and First Daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So there's a whole genre of president's daughters. It is kind of our sort of royalty, especially when you're dealing with the family, because they don't have the same kind of like policy things to work into it. So you can just sort of make them almost like royalty.
Yeah. You know what I think about though when I think of this genre? There's really only one movie that I can say that I believe is in the genre. Do you remember the Disney film My Date with the President's Daughter?
Yeah. That's in we covered that one.
Yep, that's the only thing that I could equate to. But I was watching this, I was like, wow, okay. And this was
none of them are that great. I think Chasing Liberty is the best of the three, but it's something to watch. But yeah, some other presidential movies that I thought of course, there's Lincoln, directed by Steven Spielberg, that of course you get Daniel Day-Lewis giving his incredible performance. I was like, as soon as they released that poster, you knew that he was getting an Oscar for that movie.
Yeah, but it's not the best Lincoln movie.
What's your favorite Lincoln movie?
Well, it's obviously Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter.
Yeah, right.
That's the most presidential that we will ever see of Lincoln.
I do think that Lincoln would have been better as a miniseries rather than a movie.
Oh, kind of like how John Adams was done, right?
Yeah, because there's over 100 named characters in that movie. I mean, there's so many things that they're trying to do and so many characters that I think it doesn't work as well as I want it to work, but it's still like a decent film.
Yeah.
But I think it would have been better as a series. But another one I thought of is you got to talk about Independence Day.
Yes, Bill Pullman.
Yeah. That is a movie that I do think is a teeny tiny bit overrated, but I still enjoy it. I just don't think it's like a classic. But Will Smith and Bill Pullman are great, and Bill Pullman's speech is very iconic.
Mm-hmm. Well, and if you want to dip back for series for a quick sec, I mean, you can't talk about presidents in TV and film without mentioning Martin Sheen in The West Wing with Aaron Sorkin.
Well, we're going to talk about that a lot in talking about this movie as well.
Nice. Because it's very jarring to be, which one is the president that I'm looking at right now?
Right. And then we have, if you're talking about TV shows, I mean, there's been a lot, but President Palmer in 24 was very iconic to me, at least. I love that show. You had mentioned in our off mic that Air Force One is one of your favorites.
Oh, of course. Harrison Ford taking people off
my plane.
Right. It's one of those. I don't know. It's Die Hard in a plane, but the president's John McClane. It's tough to go
Mm-hmm.
wrong with that. And I made that
Mm-hmm.
rhyme.
Yeah, there you go. Uh, and then there is Dave, which is a super fun movie that that the president is in a coma, and so they bring in his lookalike to run the government in his sort of simple ways to revolutionize everything. Kind of a Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, but he actually becomes president in it.
Do you have thoughts about Meryl Streep as the president and Don't Look Up?
I have not watched it yet.
Ah, okay. That could
Yeah.
be a little controversial.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I'm
Meryl
sure
Streep
that.
is Meryl Streep, but that
Yeah.
president harkens.
Right. Yeah, I haven't seen it. Did you like it?
I think Don't Look Up is, if you were to judge it just as like a silly disaster movie, the comedy
Uh-huh.
kind of works in that sense. But if you're trying to make it like a very like witty satire, it kind of falls apart for me in some cases. But I don't know. I had a decent
Mhm.
time with it. I wasn't offended and storming out by the end of it.
Well, that's good. We'd like to take a second from this episode of the podcast to celebrate our sponsor of this episode, and that is the Hallmarkies Patreon.
Do you love Hallmarkies podcast?
Do you want an inside scoop into what happens on the podcast?
Do you want early access to episodes and loads of cool perks?
Now is the time to become a patron of Hallmarkies Podcast.
By becoming a patron, you get to access our patron Facebook group.
You can request episodes or even be a guest on the podcast.
And most importantly, any patron can join our monthly movie watch-alongs with stars like Paul Campbell, Natalie Hall, and more.
It's as low as $2 a month to join in and become a special part of the Hallmarkies family.
Please consider, and we will love you forever.
Go to patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
That's patreon.com/Hallmarkies.
Let's talk about Aaron Sorkin. I am not in the Aaron Sorkin, everything he touches is brilliant hive of people. I'm not in that group. I respect him. I like some of his films. Some of his more popular films I don't love as much as other people do. This actually, in The American President, may be my favorite Sorkin script, which I know is a hot take.
Oh.
But I think it's really good. And the problem that I have sometimes with Sorkin is, yes, his dialogue is great. But I think sometimes the characters can be a little lacking for me. That's, again, hot take. But something like The Social Network, for me, I think has great dialogue. But to me, the characters are a little one note. Like, yeah. Mark Zuckerberg is basically just like a greedy capitalist and nothing more. And I want to know more about him. I want to know more about his character and why, he really did what he did. And I don't know, I just feel like it's easy to write greedy rich guy and I feel like he did the same thing with Steve Jobs. I want to know why he does what he does, not just that, I don't know, he's a greedy guy that everybody hates. Like, he had a lot of friends. And if you read Creativity Incorporated by Ed Catmull, they talk about how devastated the whole Pixar crew was when Steve Jobs passed away and how much they loved him. And you don't get any of that at all in Steve Jobs. You think he's just a terrible person. And I don't know, I just thought that it would be more interesting to me to see a nuanced portrayal of who he was. Show the bad, show the good. And so sometimes I get frustrated with what I feel like are his sort of simplistic characters. Yes, the dialogue is great, but I that's where he loses me sometimes.
Well, let me ask you this. Do you think that it has to do with the directors that he's pairing himself with? Do you think it's how they utilize the screenplay and his writing?
I think that might be part of it, because I was going to ask you what you thought about his sort of tenure directing his own scripts, because that has definitely gotten more mixed reception than his other collaborations.
I think it's a good thing for him in the sense that he actually gets to like finish it through, right? Because I'm sure screenwriters hate the fact that they don't really have the final say on their product at the end of the day, that it goes to their director. But at the same time, giving him that creative freedom a lot of people that, I don't know, is it kind of the directors that work with him are basing it off of other directors working with him, and that's where Aaron Sorkin's identity. So now that he's doing his own thing, directing his own stuff, you see more or less what his intentions have always been from the beginning.
Yeah, I kind of wonder if it's the latter. It's hard to know without asking him, but I did not think that being the Ricardos worked. I didn't think the script. I mean, I thought the main problem with it was the script. It had some bad casting, but the script I thought was weak. I mean, it goes all over the place. It can't decide what it's trying to say, what it's trying to do. The whole setup of the documentary did nothing to add to it, I didn't think. And I don't know, I didn't think it was a very good script.
It was, I don't know. It's one of those stories that like you're going to have a hard time selling anybody that isn't like completely immersed in that TV show and that loves those characters. It feels more like a love note to those fans than like, we're here to talk about a very serious thing, like the trial of the Chicago 7 had. Like that one had a lot more importance to it, in my opinion, than being.
It was definitely better than being the Ricardos. I mean, I just felt 1 minute it's about the writer's room, 1 minute it's about their marriage, 1 minute it's about her being pregnant, her being a communist. Like it had no focus. And I don't know, I was so glad that it didn't get nominated because I didn't think it deserved that at all. But yeah, I also think that he is best when writing television, because I think that then the characters can breathe and you can get to know them in a way that you can't in a film. And so you get all the strengths of his dialogue plus the character development that I yearn for, that I want. Yeah. And so
Rob Reiner directed this one. Do you think that was the right move as far as like a good pairing with Sorkin? Did they ever collaborate afterward?
I don't think they ever did again, but I do think it was a good mixture, and it was a good thing for Rob Reiner because his previous film had been a huge bomb. The North was a big failure, and so this was helpful to him. I think that, and I don't know if you agree, I feel like Rob Reiner is one of those directors from the 80s that's had a very tough time transitioning over to sort of digital cinema and the sort of the new century. I feel like Rob Reiner, Tim Burton, Chris Columbus, Robert Zemeckis are in that kind of group, and not to as much an extent, but like a little bit Steven Spielberg, just like a little bit.
He's drifting there.
Yeah, that they've had a hard time kind of making that transition. They've made some interesting stuff here and there, but they don't seem to be able to have transitioned that creative mindset over to the 2000s and beyond.
Mm-hmm. Well, I don't know. In this one, like that's kind of a good point when it comes to this film, because it does already feel very dated, even in the way that like these politicians are interacting with each other, in the premise being risque, but also something that at this point is like not so new. Like we get all kinds of tabloid stuff and things related to media, directed at the president, directed at his personal life. And the big crux of this film is talking about how does the president mix his personal life with being, the most powerful man in the world.
Yeah, there's some parts of it that held up and other parts that don't as much. So Sorkin had worked with Rob Reiner before this movie with A Few Good Men, his first film that was directed by Rob Reiner. But I don't think he's done anything else with him since. He hasn't made that many movies, but I guess you have the television shows, because he's done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, four television shows. And then he's done 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 feature films. Jeez. 3 of those which he directed. Do you have a favorite Sorkin film?
I'm not so sure if I've got a favorite of his, so much as like I am a fan of the witty dialogue when it's done well, and in a lot of his cases I do like it. I do agree though with the humanity bit that there's, I don't know, David Fincher and Aaron Sorkin bringing out humanity in characters is not necessarily the biggest thing that they do. But it's true that there's a lot to say about having this dialogue that everybody feels like they're so perfectly witty and able to say things in such a romantic and poetic way in a lot of ways, when most of the time people just say garbage sentences. Basically anytime I'm talking on a podcast is what real life sounds like. It's just I agree.
I mean, that's
but
true. I mean, that's kind of the same thing with something like Gilmore Girls. That's very stylized. Like nobody really talks like that, but the characters are so consistent and we enjoy them enough that it works. It all works.
I will say I love The Newsroom. The Newsroom was one of those, and I guess it's a little bit more personal now that I work at ABC4. Is that like seeing what the bullpen is like, what it's like when you're in a meeting talking about different news stories and what things you're going to run with, what things maybe just aren't going to pull the same way that you would think another story would, and how do you decide which is the better one to run for that day, and seeing kind of, because he pulls the curtain back on like, well, most of the stuff that we're doing is just to get as many clicks as we can, to get as much ratings. And the show that what's his last name? It's Will McAvoy. That's the guy that's played by Jeff Daniels. He decides to kind of upend the entire thing, and he wants to do a new show that's actually talking about real issues, things like that. And it's fascinating. The last season, we can all agree, kind of dips a little bit, but it was a fun ride for me.
Yeah. Well, there's kind of two parts of The American President. There's the political part and there's the romance part. And I mean, I'm much more interested in talking about the romance part of it. That's Hallmark's podcast. We don't want to get too much into it, but I will say that there are some interesting things that have played out kind of differently than I think people intended. And then we'll talk a little bit about it. So don't stop listening if you don't like politics. We're only going to talk about for a little bit.
We're going to talk so much politics, you guys. No, we won't.
But the interesting kind of point that President Obama made. So he was called out at one point by Maureen Dowd of the Wall Street Journal that if he could be more like Michael Douglas in The American President. And this is at the White House Correspondents' Dinner. He said, of course, everybody has got plenty of advice. Maureen Dowd said I could solve all my problems if I were just more like Michael Douglas in The American President. And I know Michael is here tonight. Michael, what's your secret, man? Could it be that you were an actor in an Aaron Sorkin liberal fantasy? Might that have something to do with it? I don't know. Check in with me. Maybe it's something else.
That's the perfect definition of what this movie is. It is a liberal fantasy.
It is a liberal fantasy. There is a point in the movie where the president of the United States says he's going to come and get the guns, and he's going to take everyone's rifles and handguns. And the idea that could be passed in Congress, especially in 1994, is laughable.
The topic is still global warming.
Well, yeah, but the idea that he could get this he's going to take not just the assault rifles, whatever, that might be possible maybe someday. And you can get mad in the comments if you agree or disagree with that. But the fact that he wanted to take everybody's handguns, that will never happen in a million years. I mean, President Obama tried really hard to get rid of assault rifles. And again, don't get mad. It's just a fact. He tried. And he couldn't get that passed. There's no way that can you imagine how much people would freak out if the president of the United States said, I'm going to come and get the guns? I mean,
we've heard it in a lot of times before. And I mean, I don't know. There's a lot to say about that, especially when it comes to mental health checks and background checks and proper ways to do
background checks. And like I said, we could get on to the politics, but I think we can both agree that if a president said that, it would be extremely controversial.
Well, not only that, but that he had the votes to either do this or to cut 20% of emissions to help combat global. We can't even do 5 at this point.
Right.
Like there's barely any movement when it comes to both of these issues. And this film has been out for almost 30 years at this point.
Well, and the idea that everybody would sort of like him more and that his approval ratings would go up for saying I'm coming to get the guns is ridiculous.
What's with, I don't know. There's so many parts, like Richard Dreyfus playing that typical like red-blooded Republican that's like he doesn't stand for values and stuff, and seeing where Richard Dreyfus ended up in real life, like there's so many parallels to this. Is a little funny to me.
Yeah, well, so here's the interesting thing. They start off this movie with him at a 63% approval rating, which is insanely high.
Very good.
I can't think of when we've ever had a president with that high in recent memory. Maybe Bush right after 9/11, maybe. I can't remember what his approval rating was. It's pretty high, but 63% is extremely high. So by the end, it went down 8 points because of him dating this woman, and that would still be extremely high. 55%.
The woman who's played by Annette Bening, who, by the way, if they were to do any type of like Elizabeth Warren film down the road, she would be perfectly cast for that.
That's
like
true.
I was watching, just like, that's a young Elizabeth Warren. That's crazy.
Yeah.
She's a lobbyist trying to push forward a way to pass combating global warming. And that's kind of how they get introduced. She's upset about him not putting more focus on it. He interrupts as she's basically like mouthing him. And then it's kismet. They love each other.
Yeah. Well, so this part of it, the romance part of it, I think is actually really well done. Very, very solid. I think that Annette Bening and Michael Douglas have great chemistry. Would you agree?
I agree. I think that, I don't know, the situational stuff, I mean, it is funny to like, it's kind of, aren't politicians already in bed with lobbyists? Like that's a thing.
Well, yeah. So we're
in this
talk
case,
about
they're
that,
actually doing it though.
But yeah, we're gonna talk about that. But I just think that they work really well together, and I think it feels believable on a just base level that these two people would be attracted to each other and that they would be compatible with each other.
The chemistry is off the charts. I really think that as far as casting goes, the president and Annette Bening were cast the best. Maybe
and I think
not
that
so much with Michael Douglas and Martin Sheen, but we can get into that.
Well, I think their dialogue is really good together and feels authentic to what these two characters would say to each other. The only thing maybe is that they do make Annette Bening's character pretty skittish, I would say, maybe is the right word. Like she's very nervous, and she flubs her words around the president and things like that, and I guess that's kind of an endearing quality to her character. But I mean, I guess most of us kind of have two sides to our character. We have like the strong public side, and then also maybe a little bit more insecure private side, and she definitely is that for this character.
I never felt she was too worried about things in this film, and I feel like she could have been a little more concerned. Like when it comes to the press and how she was going to be scrutinized, she kind of just took it all in stride. And I don't know how
fun moments with her, like messing up over the phone calls and what's he going to think of me, and that kind of was enjoyable. And she's so like excited to go into the White House, and she says, I'm trying to preserve the Capra-esque quality of the White House.
I will say though, if Marry Me has more to say about like a commoner coming into a bigger scenario. That movie.
Yeah, I mean, she does handle the press very well, and I guess she has been working as a lobbyist for a long time. But yeah, she does handle that very well. I really liked everything involving him trying to basically date her as the president, like him ordering flowers and
I love that.
All of that, those scenes when he goes into the florist shop, that's really delightful.
Especially I like when he is trying to have the secretary give him a phone number. He's like, I just want the number. And she's like, did I do something wrong? Like, do you like, what do you need? And he's like, I want to do it myself because that's what I think people do. And he's still not for sure with it.
Well, yeah, and then when they drive past the florist shop, and he's, I think there's gonna
Remember
be
me?
somebody in there that I randomly
You like
stopped
apples,
by.
lady?
But I think that in real life, the security would just go in there with him. I think they could do that. I don't know
They'd
why
clear the
not.
room first, then he'd come in. Like
I
they'd
guess,
scope
yeah,
it out,
maybe
and then he'd
so.
walk in all, fresh.
Yeah. Uh,
I loved
so
also the shots of the White House and like up against like the Washington Monument. I think those are some beautiful shots.
yeah, there is some really nice cinematography in the film.
They had a soundstage, right? This was all filmed probably on a soundstage.
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure all the White House
Or
stuff all
isn't
was.
there Hollywood would have had to have like at this point made a fake White House somewhere that nobody knows about that they could just go do whatever in.
I'm sure. Many. I'm sure they had many, many. And so a lot of this was then taken as kind of inspiration for the West Wing when they started. And you can definitely see different characters, like Wendy Malick's character kind of I feel like is a template for Allison Janney's character. You certainly, of course, have Michael Sheen, as we talked about, and in this movie, he is the chief of staff. He's also supposed to be his best friend, and they've been through from the very beginning all the way up to the current situation. So, what's your beef with Martin Sheen in this movie?
They all look alike. It's crazy. They look like they're brothers. All three of these guys. You got to have one. You can't have Michael Douglas and Martin Sheen and Michael J. Fox. They all look related.
That's true.
It was well, and it's also a little funny because when did The West Wing come out? What year was that? Came out in 99 or something.
99, yeah. But in fairness, we weren't talking about a super diverse group in the cabinets at this point. I mean, Clinton had
liberal.
Clinton had some, like Janet Reno, and some women, some people of color in his cabinet, but it was still predominantly white men.
But I will say it's nothing to their acting or their performances at all. But it's just more it's just it was tough to be like, man, you all just like they really just typecast a white male with brown hair. I got the guy. Like immediately find him. I gotta ask, have you ever watched Veep? Because Selena Meyer is
I've heard it's great.
President. She is the president. If you guys haven't watched it, and I'll say this, it's crass for sure.
Mm-hmm.
The jokes are some of the most it's if Aaron Sorkin made a diss track, but like got real nasty with it, and Julia Louis-Dreyfus is incredible. This is if you've loved her as Elaine in Seinfeld and you've wanted to see her in something that's her own thing where she can lead the entire cast, it's incredible for her. It's one of my favorite shows ever. I don't know why I didn't mention that. She is one of my favorite presidents.
Mm-hmm. So they have actually two shows that spinned off of this movie. So there's The West Wing, of course, and then they also have Spin City, which was sort of spin off from this movie with Michael J. Fox, which was his show about, I think he was the governor.
Oh, okay. Well, there you go.
Yeah, in governor or mayor, platform. I can't remember. He's one of them. He's a leader. And we'd like to take a second and thank our sponsor for this episode of the podcast. It's the Hallmarkies merch store.
Are you looking for that perfect gift for the postable, Hardy, or Hallmarky in your life?
What about getting that t-shirt or hoodie that will help you stand out at your next holiday party?
Now is the time to check out the Hallmarkies merch store.
Full of festive designs by artists like Jessica Miller, Carrie from Hallmark Comics, and more.
You can even have more than just shirts, but totes, cell phone cases, notebooks, mugs, and more.
And it isn't just Hallmark. We have designs for Anna Green Gables, Man from Snowy River, The Nanny, and more.
Every purchase at the merch store goes to help support the podcast and allows us to make the great content you know and love.
There are frequent sales, so go to tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies or see the link in the description.
That's tpublic.com/stores/Hallmarkies. The
thing that I wonder about with this movie is that I think that, especially in the 90s, that the president dating and having a girlfriend would actually help his numbers, not hurt his numbers.
It was a weird idea to think that a widowed president that had been raising a kid on his own decides to start dating somebody who is smart, who's funny, who's not like think about the controversy that was happening with the royal family a few years ago, or even like last year with the whole interview with everything, or even with Princess Diana, right? There was always this huge controversy. This seemed like it was like, oh, so he's making wise choices. I think the thing that would have been hit on them hardest during this time would be the fact that she's a lobbyist.
Yeah, but I feel like the average person doesn't really care about that. I feel like the average person would be like, oh, look how fun, he's dating this woman. You know, like I feel like that would actually be, they were acting like the average person would care more about policy and then him dating a lobbyist. But I feel like the average person would care less about that. Personally,
it could go either way right now, you know, like there's so many weird like things that just sprout out of nowhere, and like all the stuff that happened with I mean, it's kind of recently happened, started with started recently with when Trump was running and started like going after the Bushes. Then they started going after Trump's family. Then they went after the Biden, and it's always been a new like personal thing that's been happening in the past few years. So I don't know. And right now, the whole like get the lobbyists out of Congress, like I don't know if they did a contemporary version, that wouldn't be more of like the thing they'd hit harder with. But
yeah, I wonder what they would make her now.
Yeah.
As opposed to a lobbyist, because I feel like even
well, if it's a liberal one, I've got ideas.
Well, even
she's a local bartender in New York.
Well, I mean, Hollywood's not going to be making a conservative president movie. And so they were going to make
Mel
it
Gibson
now.
Produces and stars in it.
Maybe. But if they were going to make it now, they would probably make her, what would they make her now instead of a lobbyist?
You know, I would probably
part of a nonprofit, maybe.
Yeah, it would have to be a nonprofit, or it could possibly be somebody that's just, they would probably go honestly for like, she's a small town person in a small town Congress. She's the mayor of like a Hallmark small movie. Town. Yeah, like Mr. Deeds in a way, right?
Yeah.
And that's a horrible comparison between the two. But like, she's from Winchestertonville, Iowa.
There's definitely, I mean, because Mr. Deeds is based on Mr. Deeds Goes to Town, which is all about this, you know, rich man who goes and basically gives away all the money he's inherited in the town. And so there's definitely a political kind of feel or message in that movie. I mean, Adam Sandler isn't the best, but that's one of his more tolerable movies.
Oh, I thought it was back in the day, that movie. I don't know, rom-coms, they always hit me hard. And Adam Sandler rom-coms, he does good with them. When he goes full silly like Jack and Jill, things go off the rails real quickly. But like 50 First Dates, The Wedding Singer, they're incredible.
Well, I don't know if I go that far, but they have some good things. So I really like I said, I like the fact that they made her both kind of a ambitious, hard-nosed, strong character, but then also made her kind of soft and sweet and funny. And I feel like that's a lot to Annette Bening's character, but I also think it's some pretty good writing. And usually part of the reason why I don't tend to love Aaron Sorkin's scripts is the female characters are usually way underwritten. But I feel like he does a pretty good job in this one of making a full, dynamic, complex character for Sydney.
She's the only like well-written female character in a sea of mostly men.
Yeah.
But because she's the co-lead, I would say, in this, she does have a lot more to do. And I agree with you. I really like that she makes a big deal out about picking out a dress because she's always been in suits, right? Because at the beginning, she's not really seeing this as an opportunity to be dating the president. She sees this as, oh, this is a chance for me to be able to get my platform out, to be networking with more people. This is an opportunity, honestly, more than anything. It's not until he invites her over, introduces his daughter to her, and they go into the China room, which what did he call it? The plate room, the dish room,
the plate room.
He's like, I don't know, I've never been in here.
Yeah, I mean, they say when she's getting hired, and John Mahoney is in this, and he's so great. I love him, and he says that I hired a pit bull, not a prom queen, and which is the problem that women face in trying to run for office or trying to be a leader in general, is that if you are if you're a strong leader, then you're seen as a pit bull. You're seen as I'm not gonna swear, but you're seen as a witch. But then if you're too soft, then you're seen as the prom queen. You're seen as you're seen as too light, too domestic, too and so you're expected to find this kind of perfect middle ground that no human can actually find. And
he has a word of warning that if this goes south, if the relationship doesn't work, she's unhireable.
Yeah, that's true.
Honestly, maybe we won't get super political. I gotta say, Monica Lewinsky, I think she's a fantastic woman, and I like her on Twitter. She's hilarious, and she's kind of taken all of this stuff and strife over the years, but she got hit hard in the press and was mercilessly attacked.
Did you watch the recent American Crime Story, Impeachment?
I believe, when did that come out? Was that
just this last year? I thought it was really good. I really enjoyed it, and I was bummed out that it didn't get more attention than it did. I thought Sarah Paulson was absolutely incredible as Linda Tripp. I mean, I would not have known it was her if I hadn't, it wasn't on the credits. She's totally immersed herself in the role. I thought it was such an interesting show about how all of these women in different ways, even Hillary Clinton, were used by the system in different ways. And I was, none of them are like innocent or whatever. They all did what they did. But I just thought it was such an interesting portrayal of these events that we all know, but we haven't seen the behind the scenes kind of it. And I really thought it was great. Totally. But yeah, no, you're absolutely right about Monica. And she was so naive. And I think she would admit that now, of to think that he really was in love with her and that he would leave his wife for, I mean, she was just so naive, but she was really young. So you do stupid stuff when you're young.
But that's kind of the kind of weird message with this. I don't know what came first between this movie and that controversy that happened, but
so this would be before.
Okay, so that even to me is kind of interesting. That I don't think, and maybe this is what my complaint was towards the beginning. Once that warning was issued out, there wasn't really any concern on Sydney's part to feel worried that it couldn't happen. She was just kind of like, no, it'll happen.
I mean, it's true. She does go from being kind of anxious, nervous about this whole situation to being, I'm going to commit a relationship with you really quickly. She just kind of goes for it. But
who wouldn't if it's Michael Douglas? I mean, come on.
And they just have such good chemistry. And so I think that helps a lot. And I think he has good chemistry with the rest of the staff. That there are really good moments between him and Michael J. Fox, between him and Martin Sheen when they're playing pool and talking. And I think that feels pretty real to me. And I love, when he sends her ham, that's really funny.
Yeah, that was good.
And
I want to see the deleted scene of him calling the butcher, though.
Yeah.
See how that he's like, get me a number for a butcher instead. Like, where did he jump from flour to ham?
Mhm. Yeah.
It's kind of funny. It's like, you know what women love just as much as roses.
Mhm. Yeah, and there's a whole thing about him bombing the Libyans, and I think that would also be very controversial if it was to happen now. I mean, we saw what happened with what's it called? Can't think of the name all of a sudden, with when Hillary with the embassy in
Oh yeah.
Libya. Yeah.
And that's so funny because now that you mention that, like, he was just like giving her secrets. Like, she
Yeah.
totally called out when he said he was having a dentist appointment because she got told what was happening. And it's like, isn't that classified? Okay, whatever.
Yeah. So then his job approval, it goes down 8 points because it was kind of interesting because Bob Rumson is going on a campaign for Bring the Pride Back, which I think
Mhm.
is kind of
Ugh.
interesting. Um, and got a little prosaic, maybe.
Make something great again a little.
Yeah. So it's interesting how a lot of in politics, so much of what we see is just a repackaging of what we'd already seen. But
Mhm.
they make it sound revolutionary because they're, whether it's like, for example, in education, we started, we had No Child Left Behind, and then that was basically just repackaged into the Common Core. But each time it seems like, oh, I'm making these great changes. No, you're doing exactly the same thing that was done over and over and over again.
Yeah.
Very rarely. I mean, most major policy changes that happen in the United States these days is from the courts. Very rarely will there be something like the healthcare bill or something like that that's like actually significant policy change, and for better or worse. And we're not going to, whatever. But it's tough for any president to get anything done, partly by design. That's why they made it hard to get things passed. They made it hard for the founding fathers, made it hard to get anything done by design.
Yeah.
Especially if there's mixed houses.
It's true. And Richard Dreyfuss really takes advantage of just the unknown of a new thing, right? Anything that's like, I guess, a change or an evolution. It seems like one party decides to say, don't you want to kind of go back to the way things were if you're uncomfortable with a new situation, right? And they didn't really see this he saw this as an opportunity more or less than an actual issue. He looked at the fact that, okay, this is a widow. Now there's something new. We can attack this and pinpoint it. And that's where he went on his crusade.
And he's calling her the first mistress and stuff like that. I think that the way that you'd have to go about this, if this were to happen again, is I think you just have to, I think you wouldn't hide from it the way that he's hiding from it in this movie. And that's part of the reason why the Rumson gets as far as he does on it, because he's pretending like he doesn't want to address it. He doesn't want to talk about it. And so then the Rumson can claim, oh, this is, lack of ethics in the White House or whatever. Especially considering she's a lobbyist. I would have probably, what do I know? But I would probably say, have a press conference, introduce her as your girlfriend, whatever. She can be charming and charm everybody, and then turn it into something that's like a positive thing. Have her go on The View for sure. I would have her go on The View. That would be a big thing. Obviously, that didn't exist at this time, but I think you would take that kind of, have her go on Access Hollywood, and it's that kind of thing to make her somebody people like, and that can go a long way when it comes to politics and public relations these days, which sadly,
and that's the question though, right? Is where can you separate your personal life from having to tell the public about your personal life? When does it become a matter of policy rather than personal affairs? And I think it's an interesting question that they just don't really they don't explore too much, except for the fact that Michael Douglas just doesn't want to do anything. Like, he doesn't want to do any type of press. He doesn't want to comment on it because he doesn't think that it's tactful and that it helps at any point. And also, it's none of their business. But at the end, he's wrong, because it does affect him. It does hurt his numbers. It does that secrecy that the American people just don't like ever at this point. Even now, like, if you're not 100% transparent about what you're doing while you're in the position, it can be an issue. So he's
they
wrong
have that great conversation between him and Martin Sheen, where he says that he says, oh yes, he does. He has a right to question your family values. I'm a citizen. This is my president in this country. It is not only permissible to question our leaders, it's our responsibility.
Yeah, it's a bit whiny. He was a bit bit of a whiner in that one.
and then but I like when he says, in the absence of leadership, they will listen to whomever is at the microphone. And that is true.
So true.
That is true. And he says to Louis, he said, we've had presidents who were beloved who couldn't find a coherent sentence with two hands and a flashlight. People don't drink the sand because they're thirsty. They drink the sand because they don't know the difference, which is
and
quite
they'll still
damning.
drink it anyway.
Yeah. But I think in just a reality, you'd have to kind of come out on you'd have to have a strategy. They tell him he needs a strategy from the very beginning. And I mean, I guess, especially when you're president and your actual residence is in the White House, there's just really no way to separate your job from your personal life. Like, that's just the best you can hope for, is people leaving your children alone, which sometimes happens, sometimes doesn't. Usually that's they try to keep the kids safe from that kind of attack. But and he does say at one point, he says, if Mary hadn't died, would we have won 3 years ago? That he was able to sort of play the lonely widower card. And it's interesting to think about what we would think about a single man running for president. It's never happened. So
we've had single presidents, I believe, like
single presidents, but never when they were running. I don't think. And
yes, but
they
he was
say
running
in
for
the
re-election,
movie,
right?
They say in the movie that that Wilson, actually President Wilson, courted and married his wife while being president. But they also say there was no television then. It was a different time. So
well, and even when he does kind of come out in the third act to reveal like the stuff, it really just ends up being whataboutisms against the guy, right? He's like, so you're a card member, but you don't support the Constitution. It has absolutely nothing to do with his personal life. He just throws more stuff at him.
Oh yeah. So his big final speech at the end is really where it goes into full-on liberal fantasy mode. Yeah, I mean, the idea that
Rocky and Rocky IV talking Russia.
The idea that, like I said, him saying I'm going to get the guns would be like this great thing, and his popularity going way up. No way. He's thrown out the crime bill, and the crime bill, it's very interesting in this movie because now it's seen as a kind of disaster. The 95, 94 crime bill, I think 94 crime bill, which was led and championed by Joe Biden at the time, now is seen as it's over incarcerated, particularly people of color. It's led to a lot of problems. And so it's kind of interesting here that it's both seen as like super important, the crime bill, and also that he kind of throws it out at the end is an interesting irony, I guess.
Yeah, it's the situation is it's a liberal fantasy.
He says,
there's just some things that just don't make sense for logic in the real world, and it's a lot of like, but focus on the love and focus on the romance, and when you do, the whole thing works perfectly.
Yeah, I agree. It was cute at the end when he's like, I finally was able to give you flowers. And he says, well, turns out I've got a rose garden. That was cute.
He really needs to get a better tour of that house. He doesn't know a lot of places.
Yeah, that's right. And he says, I was so busy keeping my job, I forgot to do my job.
Mm-hmm.
And so because she's furious at him because he's going to table the environmental bill in order to get the crime bill passed. And that is totally real. That's what happens. I mean, things get, there's that kind of bartering with bills all the time.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, the 20% is very unrealistic. That would never happen, for better or worse.
But in all honesty, it needs to happen, and needs to happen fast.
But
the Salt Lake is no longer a lake.
But I like when they're dancing. I think that's really good. Their first date is really good, very swoon worthy. I think that, like I said, they have very good chemistry. And I asked on Twitter what my followers thought about the movie. Alex Klepp says, I love it. Michael Douglas is fantastic in the role. I could have easily seen him being nominated for an Oscar. His speech at the end is great. And his chemistry with Annette Bening is so adorable. I do think that the speech feels authentic for this supposed character. Like, if we're going to live in this reality of the supposed of the White House that they're building, it does feel like, okay, this is something he would say. But I think the idea that would be well received is the part
yeah.
Okay.
No follow-up questions.
American President is where Sorkin, this is Nostalgia Cassie says, American President is where Sorkin fully won me over and started to lose me. His wish fulfillment politicizing always rubbed up against his gift for rat-a-tat wordplay. And this is a mix of both. I prefer A Few Good Men because it leans on the wordplay side. I also love that Shepard keeps using sports metaphors throughout the film, as if letting male audiences know that it's okay to like this guy. So that's true.
Very good.
In Search of a Better Name says, often seen as a dress rehearsal for The West Wing, and by all means the most idealistic of Sorkin's screenplays, but I can't deny there is a lot to love. Almost makes you wish that the world and politics could really be like that. We have Cindy says, adore it. Carlo Chuchu says, I think Few Good Men is still my favorite of his, but this is up there. Laura Ann Marie says, I love it so much. Favorite Sorkin script. David Handler says, I thought it was corny and unsatisfying. So did its Sorkin, who used all of the research he'd done to create The West Wing. So for that, we can be grateful. One more, Alessia author Dreamweaver says, I think Sorkin's big weakness as a writer is his tendency towards schmaltz, and he needs a strong director to rein it in. Unfortunately, one of Rob Reiner's big weaknesses as a director is his tendency towards schmaltz. And so I don't think they bring out the best in each other. And then Eric Carlson says, I think my favorite movie script of his so far. Jen Johan says, love it. And then one more, Christopher Herman says, I like Molly's Game and Charlie Wilson's War better. In one of those, which of the pair that was in the air contest, I prefer Dave to the American President, but the latter is not unwatchable. So some different thoughts there.
Hey, I like the variety.
Yeah.
Because I think they all have their own valid points to it.
Yeah, I think if you're watching this as a romance, I think it's very satisfying. Again, great chemistry. I think that they both have very good characters that are well developed, dynamic characters. If you're watching it for the politics, that's not as satisfying. It does have that sort of liberal fantasy and that could be frustrating for liberals and frustrating for conservatives. I don't know.
Well, I would say to watch it because this kind of goes to the point with, I've not really talked about Peacemaker at all on this show or anything, but Peacemaker, it does have a little bit of a message to being able to be okay with people and be friends with people that have different viewpoints than yourself, right? Yeah. I don't think there's any problem with checking out a red-blooded American presidential movie and a liberal bleeding heart president movie and still feeling that that's what America is. Because at the end of the day, there were Republican presidents and there were liberal presidents. And it's not like they're, Yeah. It's
And
not like what it is
well,
today.
both presidents had very hard time getting anything done because that's the way it was designed. But it's still an overall very entertaining film, I would say. So if you get a chance to watch it, let us know what you think. Where would you rate this? 1 to 5 American flags. What would you give it?
I would probably give it a 3.5 American flags. Or we can't cut a flag in half. We'd go to jail.
Yeah.
I'd probably go 3 then.
I agree. I would give it a 3.5. I think is fair, or a 4. I like it. It's a good romance. And it is probably as close as we get to like a true American royalty kind of movie, princess kind of movie.
And it's so lame. A lobbyist and I'm just a lonely lobbyist. I don't know.
So let us know what you think. If you have seen this movie, how many flags would you give it? We would love to hear your thoughts, and any other films you like to watch during 4th of July or during President's Day. We'd love to hear what you think. And Patrick, where can people find you?
Oh, find me on patrickbeattyreviews.com. I'm doing all of the Batman talking that I possibly can before the release, and Friday films on ABC4 Good Things Utah.
That's great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews, all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. Check that out. Also, make sure you're following the Hallmarkies Podcast, or Hallmarkies Pod, and Hallmarkies Podcast, all over social media. And if you're listening on iTunes, please leave your ratings and reviews. We really appreciate that. And if you are listening on YouTube, please give the video a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel. We appreciate that so much. We also have our patron group and merch store, and we love the support that we get from the patrons. We have so much fun. And we are having this Friday, we are actually having our latest patron watch along, where we are going to be watching Love to the Rescue with writer Sarah Montana, and that's going to be really fun. So join up on the Patreon. You'll love it. We have the merch store, so take a look at that. And thanks again, Patrick. This was really fun, and we will we'll talk soon. Hopefully, maybe a less political movie.
No, we're gonna go more. We're gonna go deeper. Thank you again for having me.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.